2009, the second National Climate Assessment of Climate Change Impacts on the United States was released, followed in 2014 by the third, with increasingly detailed, geographically and sectorally disaggregated information about ongoing and projected impacts in the United States. Also in this period, there was a contrarian chorus claiming that global warming stopped in 1998. That was resoundingly refuted in the peer-reviewed literature, which pointed out that natural and human-influenced variability cause ups and downs in the rate of surface air temperature increase on timescales of years to decade, but every decade since the 70s has been warmer than the last. The 2013 fifth IPCC assessment concluded that it is extremely likely, that's now probability more than 95%, that human influence has been the dominant cause of the observed warming. Studies in this period indicated that the long-term sea level rise commitment is more than 2 meters per degree C of global temperature increase. The big uncertainty is the rate. Could that happen in hundreds of years, or will it take thousands? Finally, analyses linking global change and more frequent and or more intense weather-related extremes, downpours and snow blitzes, floods, heat waves, droughts, wildfires, powerful tropical storms became in this period increasingly robust. And I have another favorite cartoon here around the point that powerful storms are caused by the interaction of multiple factors, so you can't say that climate change caused a particular one, but climate change is quite clearly increasing the power of some of the strongest storms. And if you can read I guess you can read the cartoon, the climate change demon testifying, maybe that storm was one of mine and maybe it wasn't. You can't prove a thing, so you'll just have to let me go. Turning to key scientific understandings underpinning President Obama's Climate Action Plan, which was released in June of 2013. We know beyond reasonable doubt some very fundamental things, and those are all that one needs to know to justify what the President is doing and has proposed. The first is that the climate is changing at a pace and in a pattern that is simply not explainable by natural influences. Second, we in fact know that the dominant cause of the changes is an increase in the atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide and other heat-trapping gases, as well as black carbon, caused primarily by burning fossil fuels and land use change. Third, we know that with global temperature now about 0.9 degrees C above pre-industrial, these changes are already causing significant harm to life, health, property, economies, and ecosystems. And we know, fourth, that harm will continue to grow for decades, in the case of sea level rise for centuries, because of the long atmosphere to ocean and even longer atmosphere ocean to ice equilibration times, and because of inertia in society's energy system and land use practices. Fifth, we know that the amount of future harm that we have to expect will be much smaller, not zero, but much smaller if we take prompt, strong, evasive action than if we don't. And this from the third National Climate Assessment just shows the difference between low emission scenarios and high emission scenarios for temperature change in the United States toward the end of this century. And the sixth thing we know is that the cost of the needed evasive action is likely to be much smaller than the cost to society from future change in the absence of the needed action. And that's true even without counting co-benefits from mitigation and adaptation measures like reduction of conventional air pollution. So President Obama's Climate Action Plan, again, June 2013, 3 major components: cutting the responsible sources of pollution in the United States, domestic mitigation, preparing for the impacts of climate change adaptation, and leading international efforts in both respects, mitigation and adaptation. So a little more on how science shaped that Climate Action Plan. The key understandings provided the motivation for seeking to develop a cost-effective plan to reduce the impacts, provided the sense of urgency for doing so now rather than waiting, provided the awareness that a plan had to include both mitigation and adaptation, provided the knowledge of the sources of the offending emissions and the character of our vulnerability that allow appropriate specificity in designing a plan, and provided the recognition that any US plan has to include a component to bring other countries along. So let me turn finally to the recent and emerging insights most likely to influence public perceptions and policy decisions going forward. First of all, I think growing awareness and analysis on the impacts of climate change directly on human health. Heat stress perhaps above all, which is going to be a big, big deal as heat waves multiply, but also smog intensity, allergies, pathogens and vectors, and more. Second, growing extremes of wet and dry, downpours and floods, droughts and wildfires, which are influenced by temperature, by dryness, by pests, and by lightning, which recent analysis indicates lightning strikes are getting more frequent under climate change. Third, impacts outside the Arctic of accelerated climate change in the Arctic, northern hemisphere extreme weather, methane releases from tundra, permafrost, and seabed. Again, these are getting more tentative as we go down the list, but my personal expectation is that these, the science behind these phenomena will become stronger over the near future, and their influence on public perceptions and decisions will increase. The intersection of sea level rise and increased storm intensity and the resulting storm surges. More Sandies. The impacts of ocean heating and acidification together on marine food webs and commercial and subsistence fisheries. And other impacts on ecosystem dynamics, tropical forests, coral reefs, biodiversity extinctions. That ultimately is going to become an important part of public perception as well. What do we need to do? Here's my quick list of what we need to do immediately going forward. Defend the request for clean energy R&D, geosciences, and Earth observations in the President's FY16 budget, all under fire from certain factions in the Congress. Ensure that the EPA's power plant rules are finalized. Improve the coverage, usability, and user base of the Climate Data Initiative and Climate Resilience Toolkit, designed to enable people to take sensible adaptive actions. Build the global public-private partnership for boosting resilience in developing countries that the President announced in September of last year. Maintain the momentum toward a comprehensive, equitable, and ambitious climate agreement in Paris. Implement the President's Climate Education and Literacy Initiative to get the public support we need for all of the above. And of course, miss no opportunity to rebut the contrarians. Thank you very much.